I think the real players here are the European governments, Germany and the other partners, and the Greeks. I think the IMF wants to get out of here as soon as they can out of this deal. They don't want to be involved in the deal. And the question is whether Germany or Greece will blink first. I don't think any of them will blink first. And I think it's going to go to the last minute. And I think we're going to have a moment of panic. And the question is who will be the one who feel that they're about to lose more and maybe concede on some of the things that they're not willing to do now.
You know, forgive me for using this saying, there's too many, sometimes people say, you know, an idiom, too many cooks spoil the broth, so to speak. But I mean, in case of all of these people that are negotiating with Greece, who do you think has more flexibility or is willing to at least give Greece a little bit more leeway in these negotiations?
I think the IMF is willing to give a lot of leeway because what they want is to get out, and what they feel is that an agreement is the best thing that happened to Europe. They're really afraid of the possibility of an exit or the default.
Okay.
Now, between the Germans and Greece, I think they have positions that at this point are very far from each other. And I think the question is, what is their fear of the outcome of a crisis? And that's very hard to tell from the outside. Right. It's very hard to be on the heads.
And it always comes down to politics, let's face it. I mean, they have a responsibility to answer to their electorate, right?
Correct.
But I mean, talk to us about exactly where they are stuck on these negotiations. Is it about the reforms or is it more?
I mean, I think on the reform side, there are a couple of reforms which are very obviously controversial from a Greek point of view. Those are on the labor market, on the pension reforms. But the biggest issue that I see is that the Germans, what they want is a very strong short-term sign that the Greeks are committed. And that comes in the form of a large primary surplus this year, next year, going forward. Right. And that's exactly the point where the Greeks said, this is the only thing that we're not going to do again. We're not going to do austerity that hurt the Greek economy, and this is something that we're not willing to negotiate.
Is that even economically feasible that the Greeks can run a primary surplus at all?
Well, it's not feasible as we've seen in the past, but at least you can commit to it, even if it's not going to happen, by raising taxes and cutting some spending. And that's what the Germans are asking for. Okay. It hasn't worked in the past because the moment you do that, your economy collapses and your revenues go down even more. But the commitment is something that is very feasible, even if it doesn't work.
It means a lot, definitely, and certainly to the markets that are very nervous. I mean, you know, we have not been, this is uncharted territory, uncharted waters here. We have not had this situation since the euro came into effect many years ago. But let's suppose the Greeks don't manage to make that payment to the IMF this Friday. Then what are we looking at? I mean, can they remain within the Eurozone and not make these payments?
I mean, the closest example we have is Cyprus. Cyprus had a crisis. There were some deposits being lost. There was a banking crisis. Cyprus stayed in the system. Right. How did it stay? With very strong capital controls. Okay. And the capital controls will avoid the bank run so that the Greek citizens don't go to their banks, take their money thinking, maybe at some point we're going to go to another currency.
Well, let's face it, you know, Cyprus is a tiny, tiny economy. I mean, it's inconsequential in the context of how big the Eurozone economy is. But I mean, and to some extent Greece as well, except for the numbers, of course, that they've borrowed from everybody. But I mean, if they were to adopt that sort of precedent, how do you think the markets would handle it?
I mean, I think it's not a question of size. We've seen countries, not in Europe, like Argentina, having capital controls around crisis, and these are large economies as well. We go back to politics. The question is, from a Greek point of view, from the point of view of the Greek government, is it feasible to impose capital controls on its citizens and survive politically? That I'm not sure.
You're a professor of economics, so I'll just ask you, it's possibly a difficult question, but I mean, you know, Treasury Secretary Jack Lew warning the markets on Friday that they should minimize the global risk of them sliding out of the euro. Do you think that there's a degree of complacency when you look around at what's happened to the markets, be it fixed income, you know, stocks and also the currency?
Well, I think people assume that something will happen. You see, the Europeans have been very good at waiting until the last minute, and markets assume that they'll fix it somehow. I think maybe they're a little bit too optimistic this time.